In Monday's lecture, we'll be looking at the role that class has played in UK politics since 1945. And to be equipped to do that, we need to have some understanding of the different ways in which class divisions can be conceptualised and theorised. Now, there's a number of different theories about the nature and causes of class division which we can employ. However, in essence, there are two main traditions of class analysis which have been the subject of interpretation and reinterpretation over successive generations. In essence, these two traditions look to either the work of Karl Marx or Max Weber. And these two traditions differ in quite fundamental ways. And this is what I want to spend most of this online lecture talking about. For Marx and Marxists, the focus in respect of class is on exploitation. For Weberians, it's on life chances. So what I want to now do is spend a little time looking at how Marxist and Weberian approaches to class differ. For Karl Marx, class was a central concept in his work. Marx perceived that there were different historical epochs: antiquity, feudalism, capitalism, and eventually socialism. But each of those three, antiquity, feudalism and capitalism, were distinguished by a predominant mode of production. In each of those modes of production, a small class of non-producers were responsible for controlling the means of production. So in essence, we have a setup where there is exploitation and domination by one class. In each of those societies, we find that there are those who possess resources, those who have capital, those who control the means of production, who are able to live off the labour of others. And this, in essence, sets up the kind of characteristics of class relations in a capitalist society. For Marx, there is the same basic inequality between those who have sufficient resources, capital, to be able to live off the labour of others, and this associates with the two major classes of the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. Now, Marx does recognise that other classes do persist from other earlier modes of production. We still might find evidence of the aristocracy or of peasants. But generally, as these epochs move and develop over time, those become kind of historical residues. He does also recognise other classes. For example, he does talk about in his work the petty bourgeoisie, those who own capital but don't own enough to be able to employ labour. Now, for Marx, these classes were to be the motive forces of history. They were historical actors. Marx argued that people in the same class have the same experiences and interests, and that over time the proletariat will become more and more radicalized. It will become not just a class in itself, that is, focused on the objective conditions which define itself as a class, but it would also come to see itself as a class for itself. That is, it would develop a subjective class consciousness. Now, in terms of Marx's work, there are many gaps and many problems with those theories. In particular, he says relatively little about what we'll now consider the middle classes. And that's where various later theorists have attempted to fill in the gaps. For example, Eric Olin Wright notes that some intermediate strata occupy contradictory class positions. For example, middle managers both control people but are also controlled. Also, small employees, semi-autonomous wage earners, complicating the class structure from what Marx saw. But nevertheless, the Marxist analysis has been one which has been persistent, although it has been subsequently adapted by various later scholars. Let's now look a little bit more in detail at the Weberian model of class. Unlike Marx, who essentially kind of works with a two-class model, Weber operates with a multi-class model. Where for Marx, classes are principally determined by a single factor, basically by where they stand in the relations of production, Weber puts forward a variety of factors. In particular, where Marx was concentrating on relations of production, Weber is concentrating on how different classes gain their incomes, and for him, a particularly important aspect of that is how class positions are determined by people's position in the market. what he's looking at is what people can offer in order to gain an income. For Weber, those sharing a similar class position, a similar position in their market, have a similar pattern of life chances. So basically what he's saying is that market situation directly affects the chances of securing the particular good things in life that we might want to gain. So while he's agreeing here in an indirect sense that production relations are important, he's also suggesting some broader factors which might underpin and relate to class differences. This leads him to identify a complex hierarchy of class divisions. He talked about the working class, but also the petty bourgeoisie. He talked about technicians as a separate class, talks about property owners. So similar categories to Marx in many respects, but the sources of class structuring are very different and lead to a much more kind of complicated model of class. The divisions that he's talking about here are ones which are shaped by a variety of different things. So there's inequalities in the distribution of rewards which follow on from market positions. But Weber also talks about things like prestige. So he says that different groups are distinguished by their status, and that different groups will practice policies of closure, exclusion and usurpation to preserve their social prestige and their privileges in relation to other groups. He also talks about how political power can help shape those divisions. Now, for when Marx argues that kind of class differences become simpler and more antagonistic, Weber says that classes will become more heterogeneous as time went on. As the division of labour becomes more and more complex, we would see more divisions and subdivisions within class categories. And he also takes issue with Marx insofar as he regards class struggle and revolution as not an inevitable process. There is no inevitability in Weber's perspective for class action and class conflict. So to summarise this, for Marx, class relationships are grounded in exploitation and domination within relationships of production. For Weber, there are different life chances within the market which generate class identities and class positions, but class consciousness and political action is contingent, and that we're in a situation where multiple factors determine class relationships in societies. Now, when we get to the lecture on Monday, we'll look in more depth at how some of these different ways of conceptualizing class work through in contemporary British society in terms of our class structure. Thanks for watching and thanks for listening. If you have any questions, please do bring them along to the lecture on Monday.